The concept of superimposition by Adi Śaṅkara, and our faculty guest speaker today is Dr. Venkataraman Swaminathan. And before we get started, let me just remind you to put in the chat where you are zooming in from, and I can give you a shout out. And let me just introduce the webinar topic. And the concept of superimposition is heavy in itself. But let's start with the main source of human insecurities and sense of sadness is ignorance of the limitless self, and subsequently taking the non-self to be the self. So Adi Śaṅkara offers a brilliant insight into this fundamental human problem by advocating the principle of superimposition, or in Sanskrit, Adhyasa, which causes the appearance of a thing on a locus other than its own. Since the superimposition is a cognitive error, naturally, the remedy is removing the error by a cognitive de-superimposition. The first time I read that, I was like, okay, this is going to be a heavy webinar, but Dr. Swaminathan is going to go through this topic, but in this webinar is also going to introduce the great Adi Śaṅkara, his Adhyasa bhasya, one of his, considered to be his magnum opus, right, a major text. And it finds its place as the introduction to Adi Śaṅkara's exhaustive commentary of the Brahma Sutras and so much of his other work. So Dr. Venkataraman Swaminathan is going to get into these details, is going to introduce Adi Śaṅkara. Many of us know and are familiar with, but maybe some background on that great figure in Hindu Sanatana Dharma history would be helpful. We have a few more people joining us. Sherry from Florida, Ramesh from Philadelphia, Dhanalakshmi ji from Malaysia, Prabhaji from Minnesota, Chittaranjan ji from Columbus, Ohio. Thank you everyone for joining. Teresa from Arkansas, glad to have you on. And with that, let me introduce Dr. V. Swaminathan, who has been a student of Pujya Swami Dayananda Saraswati and of other revered acharyas of the Arsha Vidya Gurukulam for nearly 3 decades. He's been teaching online Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, other Vedanta classes. He's an ardent devotee of Kanchi Paramacharya and has penned articles on Periyaya's inimitable style of inquiry of the Shastras. Dr. Swaminathan has a wide range of background and is a retired scientist and is currently affiliated with the Rice University as an adjunct professor in the Department of Material Science and Nano Engineering. He is a distinguished research fellow at Lehigh University, and we are, of course, glad to have him on with Hindu University of America. He has received many professional accolades. He's worked for the famous Bell Laboratories for 24 years and for the U.S. Army as a civilian scientist for 14 years. And in recognition of his retirement from the U.S. Army back in September 2017, the flag of the United States of America was flown over the United States Capitol at the request of Honorable Leonard Lance, a member of Congress. And so with that introduction, let me hand it to Dr. Swaminathan to get us started on the concept of superimposition articulated by Adi Śaṅkara. Dr. Swaminathan?
Thank you very much, Ankur Ji. So let me share my slides. You can all see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Very good. You can hear me well, all right?
Very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very, Ankur, for the nice introduction and also introducing this topic, the concept of superimposition of Adi Shankaracharya. So at the very outset, let me begin with the prayer, then we will get into the subject. Om Gananaham Tva Ganapatigum Havamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamasravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspada Anashunvan Udhebesheta Sadhanam Maha Ganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavat Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Mukam karodi vachalam pangum langhete girim yatkripatamaham vande paramanandamadhavam yatkripatamaham vande Shri Dayananda Sadgurum yatkripatamaham vande Sadgurum Chandrasekharam. Thank you all for signing up for this webinar, and I'm very happy to speak to you. Thanks for taking the time. So as Ankurji mentioned, so in the beginning, I will say a few things about Adi Shankaracharya and his contributions to Sanatana Dharma. There is a popular slokam which is said about him. Ashtavarshe Chaturvedi Dvadase Sarvasastravit Shodashe Kritavan Bhashyam Dvatrimshe Munirabhyagat. It says, by the age of 8, he mastered the 4 Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharva. He is a Chaturvedi by the age of 8. Dvadashe at 12, he was a scholar of Sastra, Sastravit. Shodashe at 16, he became a master commentator. He is a bhasya. At 32, he was considered a great rishi or a muni. Munihi Abhyagat. Very illustrious figure. His contributions within the short span of 32 years is so immense that the purist in the tradition will consider that these contributions are amanushyam, could not have been made by just a human embodiment, a human being. So therefore, many would consider him as an avatara, a reincarnation. And here, avatara of Lord Shiva iti, that is how many look upon him. So even in the address, they say Bhagavan Shankara. His biography, very briefly, there are many biographies of Shankara. Almost all of them agree that he lived just for 32 years. The year of his birth varies from 508 BC up to 788 AD. In the academic circle, the most accepted year of Shankara's advent on this earth is 788 AD. Some scholars push it back to 684. But in the Vaidika Sampradaya, in the Vedic tradition, the accepted birth of Shankara goes to 508 BC. Many biographies of Shankara have been written. They go by the title Shankara Vijaya or Shankara Digvijaya. Among them, the ones which are authoritatively accepted are the Anandagiris, who has written commentaries on the commentaries of Shankara, His book is called Shankara Vijayam. And Madhava Vidyaranya, the two brothers, Vidyaranya became later the pontiff of the Sringeri Mutt. So these two have written a biography called Shankara Digvijaya. They are the ones accepted to be the most authoritative and widely accepted as well. Without telling a lot about his birth, etc., just simply mention he was born to Shiva Guru and Aryamba, the two parents, the father and the mother, in Kaladi, in current Kerala state. To put together or summarize the life of Shankara, so in a pictorial format, Shankara Chitra Katha. At the age of 8, due to a situation where he lived a Purna river, he was caught hold of by a crocodile. To escape from the grips of the crocodile, if he takes sannyasa, which is like equivalent to another birth, he could be saved. His widowed mother was looking at the scene, pleaded with him, and with her permission, he takes sannyasa at the age of 8. And the story is that he was freed from the crocodile to symbolize a second birth, so to speak. There is a biological birth, then there is a spiritual birth, a transformation to pursue spirituality. He goes in search of Govinda Bhagavad Padacharya in the banks of river Narmada. He became his disciple, subsequently became a sannyasi. He was already a sannyasi, but now he is a erudite scholar, a sannyasi. Then these pictures describe the different incidents that happen in his life. This is a pictorial representation of his worship of Devi, subsequently brought golden coins for a poor woman, Kanakadhara Stotram or Kanakadhara Stavam. He accepts his first disciple, Bhatmapadacharya. Then subsequently, other disciples come to him. Here, Astamalaka is shown to be he becomes a disciple of Shankara. So the 4 disciples, Bhatmapadaha, Surechwaracharya, Astamalaka, Todakacharya. He meets Vedavyasa. Then he wins over in an argument Surechwaracharya, who was at that time Mandala Mishra, a Purvamimamsaka. Then subsequently, he becomes a disciple of Shankara. Shankara then goes around 4 times. He travels the breadth of India, north, south, east, west, wins over a lot of contentious disciplines or darshanas, philosophies, and some of them very strange philosophies that were followed at his time. So it is said that 72 such contentious matas, by disputation, he demolishes them. Then, before the end of his disappearance from this planet, he establishes 4 matas in the different quarters of India. The Govardhana Matha in Puri, Sharata Matha in Sringeri, Kalika Matha in Dwaraka, Jyotir Matha in Badari. Then there is some arguments about whether he established a matha in Kanchipuram, which is the Kamakoti Pita in Kanchipuram. So 4 or 5. We don't need to get into those contentions, but these are the matas that he established to propagate the Sanatana Dharma and the Vaidika Sampradayas. So in short, this is his life. There are many salutations that we say, for Shankara, and they are very poignant and also tell a lot about him. Srudishprati Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Samkaroti iti Shankaraha, one who does good for the loka, the society. And he is the abode, alayam, of Shruti, the Vedas, Smriti, the various recorded texts, Puranas, of all of them which we look upon as Pramana, means of knowledge. He was the abode of it. But he is not simply the abode of this spiritual text, but he made it a point to propagate them with a lot of compassion. So Karunalayam, an abode of the scriptures and a propagator of the scriptures with a lot of compassion to his disciples and so on. He is Bhagavat Padaha, the most exalted. To that Shankaram, my salutations. Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krutau Vante Bhagavantav Punah Punah. The two pillars, if you will, of the Vaidika Sampradaya or Sanatana Dharma, which we call Hinduism today. The two pillars are Shankara and Veda Vyasa. Veda Vyasa codified the Vedas. The Vedas were existent even before Vyasa, but he edited them, compiled them, organized them. So in the tradition, we look upon these two as the pillars of Sanatana Dharma. Not only we look upon them as the pillars of Sanatana Dharma, we look upon them as avatars of the Lord. So Shankara is avatara of Shankaracharya, is avatar of Shankaram, the Shiva. Badarayana, that is Vyasa, is the avatar of Keshava, the Vishnu. One created or one made the sutras, the Bhikshu Sutras or the Brahma Sutras, wherein in the abhoristic form, in sutra version, he condensed the essence of the Upanishads. So he is a Sutrakaraha, the one who made the abhorisms of the Upanishad Sara. Then the one who wrote commentaries is a Bhashyakaraha. So when we say Bhashyakaraha in the Sampradaya, in the tradition, we mean Shankara. Mahabhashyakaraha, if we say, we refers to Patanjali Muni, who wrote a Bhashyam on the Paninian Sutra. So Mahabhashyakara is Patanjali and Bhashyakara is Shankara. Sutra Bhashya Kritau Vante, Aham Vante, these two great luminaries of the tradition, Shankara, Shankaracharya, Keshava, the Vyasacharya, they are Bhagavan, Bhagavantau. They are like avatars for us. Again and again, we offer our salutations in expressing our deep gratitude to these two great pillars of the Vaidika Sampradaya. Then we look upon him, the Shankaracharya, as Lord Sadashiva, the Lord Shiva. And in the teaching tradition, which Shankara propagated, the originator of the teaching tradition is Sadashiva, Lord Dakshinamurti, in the form of a teacher, Shiva as Dakshinamurti in the form of a teacher. He is the first teacher, if you will. Sadashiva Samarambham, starting from Sadashiva. Shankaracharya Madhyamam, in between is Shankaracharya. He is the link for now for us to the connection to the Vedas. Asmadacharya Priyantam, up to my current Guru, starting from Sadashiva and paying obeisance to in the middle Shankaracharya. And my current Guru, the teacher now that I learned from, Asmadacharya Priyantam, up to that Guru Paramparam, the lineage of teachers, Aham Mante, my salutations. In the tradition, when we begin the study of any Vedantic text, we say these slokas as salutations and expressing our gratitude, the pillars of our Hindu Sanatana Dharma. Now, Shankara, his works are many. And the principal ones are the following. He wrote commentary, bhasya. So he's a bhashyakara on Prasthanatraya. Prasthanatrayam constitutes 3 spiritual texts which a student of Vedanta must study. Shruti Prasthanam, which are the Upanishads. Smriti Prasthanam, the Bhagavad Gita. The Nyaya Prasthanam, the Brahma Sutras. So he wrote a commentary on all these 3. And even today, we follow those commentaries with the other explanatory notes on those commentaries of many other acharyas. He wrote many prakarana granthas, independent treatises like Viveka Chudamani, Upadesha Sahasri, like this. There are many. I listed a couple as examples. Then many stotras also he composed. And some of them are very Vedantic in nature. The Dakshinamurti Stotram is one. Actually, I am teaching in the current semester the Dakshinamurti Stotram at the Hindu University. Harimide Stuti, Kashi Panchakam, all these are called Vedantic Prakarana text, and many more stavas and stotras that he had composed. So very voluminous literature. Some we know for sure are Shankara. Some are, of course, in the tradition attributed to Shankara. Nevertheless, we don't make any contention about whether he was the author. We study all those texts with the same reverence as though they were all created by Shankara or composed by Shankara. So with this brief introduction about Shankaracharya, let me now jump into the text proper. Just give me 1 second. Okay. In order to understand the principle of superimposition, which is the topic for today, we have to understand what we mean by knowledge and what would constitute as erroneous knowledge. Suppose if there is an apple that I see, then I would have, of course, what I see is an object, and due to a cultural impact, people tell me when I was growing up that this is, my mother showed me this and say this is an apple. So next time when I see this fruit, I recognize it as apple. So I see an object and I know that it is an apple. That is tasmin tat buddhihi. In the locus, tasmin is adhikarana saptami. In that locus of that object, whatever that object is that I perceive with my eyes, tasmin tat buddhihi. The knowledge is true to that object. I have the knowledge of the apple. Suppose you, in the Navaratri times, which is coming very soon, we will have this apple. Of course, as you see, this is a plastic apple. But a child, suppose, looks at that form, that object, it will have the notion, the knowledge that it is an apple, but that knowledge is atasmin tad buddhihi. In the locus where it is not an apple, that is, it is not the locus of an apple, we have the knowledge that it is an apple. Atasmin tat buddhihi. This knowledge is mithya jnanam, whereas the erroneous knowledge, or whether this knowledge is true to this object. So when we talk about knowledge or whatever, we have to ascertain whether the knowledge is true to the object, tasmin tad buddhihi, or I have an erroneous knowledge, atasmin tat buddhihi. In the locus of the non-object, I have the object cognition. This is very, very, a situation which we often encounter. in our life. So this second knowledge, this erroneous knowledge, or what we say mithya jnanam, mithya ajnanam or mithya jnanam, whichever way that compound is looked at, we won't go into the grammatical construct. Mithya jnanam, erroneous knowledge, atasmin tat buddhihi, this is what we say superimposition. In the locus where this object is not there, we perceive or cognize an object. Atasmin, the is the wrong locus. In the wrong locus, atasmin, tad buddhihi, an object cognition where it should not have been. So this is the superimposition. This is the concept of superimposition. Now, you might wonder whether it is there in our life, whether we encounter. Actually, the answer is yes. Lo and behold, we deal with superimposition all the time without realizing it as it is. There is an innocuous superimposition, an innocent superimposition that is not harmful. So I'm going to distinguish it from something else later. An innocuous superimposition, you see a blue sky. The blue sky is in fact, so when I look up on a, so let's say, fairly clear day, I see as though there is a blue dome which appears above me, which I call a sky. This perception that there is a dome, in the Shastra it describes it as the bottom of a inverted vessel. You know, if you have a big vessel, the bottom of that vessel, and then you invert it, how it would look, the bottom of that vessel, inverted vessel. This is how I see something like a dome, and it appears blue. Okay. Neither the dome, the perception of the dome, nor the blueness of that dome are real. The blue, now we know by science, by Rayleigh scattering of particles, the particles are smaller than the wavelength of the blue light. The particles scatter the sunlight. So the blue color is predominantly scattered, and because of the atmospheric particles. And so it looks like the atmosphere, which is what you see, is now like a blue sky, a dome, and the dome is blue. So the blueness and the domeness, if you will, are really superimposed. And this is a innocuous superimposition. Incidentally, while we know today that the blueness is due to Rayleigh scattering, Rayleigh is the scientist who discovered the scattering of sunlight by atmospheric particles, our forefathers, the rishis, knew this. I don't know how they knew. They knew the blueness is a superimposition. So this is an innocuous superimposition which we witness every day. There is an undesirable superimposition. The mirage water. You see on a hot day and you drive on a highway, it's a very hot summer, let's say, you see as though the road is wet. But the road is not wet. It is really due to the sunlight coming closer to the earth because of the heat of that ground, and the near surface of that ground, the refractive index of the light changes. So the refractive index, changing refractive index, gives the perception of the road being wet. This mirage water is a classic superimposition. It is undesirable because a deer runs towards this mirage water to quench his thirst and gets exhausted in that process and dies away. So an undesirable superimposition. Even this mirage water, which we know today by science, is just due to rarefication of that surface closer to the ground due to the change in the refractive index of the air molecules, changing the refraction of light, which we know today, but this was known as well. an undesirable superimposition. Then there is a deliberate superimposition. It is actually sanctioned by the Shastra. You all are familiar with this. You do a Ganesha puja at home. The priest, the officiating priest, will ask you to bring some turmeric powder. In the turmeric powder and mix it with water, he will make a Ganesha. There's some shape like a Ganesha. This looks really very good imitation. Sometimes we don't even have to do all that. You just make it a lump of turmeric, Ganesha, and then you superimpose Ganesha. Haridra bimbe, Haridra means turmeric, Haridra bimbe, Sumukham Ganesham avahayami. Iti you say, I invoke in this form, made up of a lump of turmeric, I invoke Lord Ganesha. Then you can invoke that Lord at that altar and you can perform the entire puja, the 16 Shodashakala puja, offering to that turmeric. But there you don't look upon it as a turmeric, but you look upon it as Lord Ganesha. So this is a deliberate superimposition, which actually the Shastra recommends for you to do if you want to create an altar, to do exactly like Shaligrame, the stone Shaligrama, Vishnum avahayami. You superimpose Lord Vishnu. Chitrapate, you may have a picture of some Devi or Deva, then you can superimpose whatever you want to do on the Chitrapata. This is a deliberate superimposition suggested by the Shastra itself. Then, coming to the most important one, there is an unfavorable superimposition, unfavorable to the one who is making the superimposition. This is a trail, a forest trail, let's say, on a fall evening. The light is not very much. So it's kind of, there is light, yet not sufficient light. You see a lot of things on the trail, not very clear, and there is an object that lies on the trail. So you are walking towards it. There is dim light, that's very important. The object that is there is evident. You see that there is something. But really what is there is a rope, a piece of length of rope. But you don't recognize it as rope because of the dim light. But it is not dim enough. It's not total darkness. So for you not to see the object, you do see the object. So there is a locus, there is an object that is seen, but it is not recognized as what it is. Then, it's an evening, as darkness is falling, you are walking, returning home from the trail, etc., etc. And then at that time, you are in a situation due to some similarities of the shape of this object, some in ups and downs is kind of twisted a little bit. And there looks like there may be a head type of kind of thing. So due to some similarities and certain previous impressions in the mind, perhaps yesterday during daylight itself, when you were walking on the trail, you did see perhaps a snake. So similarities and previous impressions, now you project a snake on this object. So now it is a clear case of atasmin tad buddhihi, where the locus of the snake is not, there is snake knowledge. In the locus of the rope, which is not the locus of the snake, it is the locus of the rope, but the rope is not recognized as a rope, the object is not recognized true to itself, there is a snake perception, then immediately there is a fear, causing one to run away from the trail. You do pravritti, you don't want to stay here, you just run away out of fear. This is unfavorable because of it makes you do certain things which are not necessarily needed. First of all, you have emotions which are not justified, fear. Your actions that you are retreating from that place out of fear also not justified. But all these things do happen because of this atasmin tad buddhihi, where the object is not recognized true to itself due to various conditions that prevail, dim light, etc. And your own projections or your own samskaras, your own thinking patterns, whatever, made this superposition to happen. And as a consequence, there are some unfavorable circumstances that you face. Now, this is the idea that Shankara advocates. The main source of human insecurities, I am limited. And sense of sadness, I'm subject to sorrow, sukha dukkha. And in my experiences of sorrow and pleasure, it's predominantly sorrow. Once in a while, I do enjoy certain pleasures. I sense of limitation. There's a sense of lack. I lack and I need to fulfill that lack. I'm always driven to fulfill that lack. Then there's a fear of mortality, fear of death, etc. So it's all due to the ignorance, while actually the true reality of the self, the true content of I, the I cognition, the true content of that I is the limitless self. That's what the Shastra reveals. Now, contrary to that, my feeling is one of limited self, limited in all ways, limited by time, limited by space, and limited by all the padarthas, substances that are there on this universe. So I take the self, which is the limitless self, to be something other than it. In fact, I take what is not the self, atasmin tat buddhihi, what is not the self, I take it to be the self. I take the body to be the self. So I say I'm a man, I'm a woman, etc., etc. So I take the mind to be I. I take the intellect to be I. So various superpositions I make, and consequently, I pay certain price of that superposition. Always there is a sense of limitation. There is always a sense of insecurity. There is always fear of things, fear of mortality, etc., etc. So how do you recover this? But first we have to recognize the problem. So Adi Śaṅkara offers a brilliant insight. And as Ankurji said, this is the most significant contribution of Adi Śaṅkara, and that's how the Sampradaya we look upon this. A brilliant insight into this fundamental human problem. It's not a topical problem. Everyone has this self-ignorance. Everyone behaves in that self-ignorant manner. Everyone takes oneself to be the non-self, the body, mind, or whatever, the body, mind, sense complex. Everyone has the fear of mortality. Everyone has this insecurity. It is not caste, creed, race. No, nothing matters. All human beings who are 100% self-conscious have the self-judgment about themselves and suffer due to that self-judgment. So he advocates that the fundamental cause of this human problem is the superimposition. In Sanskrit, Adhyasa. Adi Asaha. Adi is the adhikaranam, the locus. Adi, in that Asaha, you put something else. In where the locus, what it should not be, Adi, you put something. Asa means to put, place, whatever. So in where it is not, you place something else. Adhyasa is causing the appearance of a thing on a locus other than its own. This is the fundamental problem of human misery. So quickly let me examine some conditions of this adhyasa to take place. So the conditions are, when something is evident, it should be partially evident. In other words, whether it is evident or self-evident, doesn't matter. It's partially known. But what it is, not known. In that example I showed you, you see an object on the trail, but you don't recognize it as a rope. Not that you don't see the object. If you don't see the object, there is no reason for superimposition. Ignorance is a bliss. You don't make any mistake. You will just walk. But when you see and don't recognize it as what it is, then there is an ideal condition for superimposition. So this is the condition for making the superimposition. Something should be known and unknown. It is evident, at the same time fully not known. So what we say, ajnana timira, that means like a cataract in the eye, it is blocked. So we have this rope. We have now a doubt because it's not known as a rope. What could this be? What this object is? A doubt, samshaya comes. Then when the doubt comes, you have to settle that doubt. So you project something due to various reasons I mentioned before. So a vikshepa, then there is erroneous knowledge. Viparita grahanam, anyata grahanam. You take this object to be other than what it is. You take it to be a snake. So this is the famous rope snake example in Vedanta. Similarly, the I, the self, is self-evident. But I am is known. If I ask you, are you there? Everybody will say affirmatively. You don't have to consult somebody whether you are there or not. I am is known, yet not known to be the limitless Brahman, the limitless self. So therefore, there is an ideal condition of superimposition, and people superimpose all kinds of things on this blessed I. So there is no clear-cut meaning for the pronoun I as understood by people. It keeps on varying. So the confusion about the nature of I is universal. It's not a topical problem. It's a fundamental problem. The ignorance of that object is polluted by error. If the ignorance is total, it's a bliss. But the ignorance is polluted by error, giving rise to an erroneous knowledge. So the ramifications of Adhyasa, the non-self is superimposed on the self. The attributes of the non-self, such as the death of the body, is superimposed on the self. Therefore, self is subject to death, and so there is a fear of mortality. The samsara, the cycle of birth and death in the life of becoming, is also caused by adhyasa due to ignorance of the self. So ajnanam, the ignorance, causes adhyasa, and adhyasa causes samsara. So the adhyasa is a symptom of a disease. Ajnanam is the cause of the disease. So Shankara, first recognizing the symptom, then he goes to address the cause. Ajnana nivritti is samsara nivritti. And ajnana nivritti is adhyasa nivritti. Adhyasa nivritti is samsara nivritti. So superimposition is a cognitive error. It's a cognitive mistake. It's not a physical mistake. It's a cognitive error. So the remedy for removing the error is cognitive desuperimposition. So I'm not going to tell in this seminar how you do the cognitive desuperimposition. For this, you have to, I would suggest, please take the course and find out. The course objectives quickly. We will detail the conditions of the superimposition. We will analyze this thoroughly. And what are the various ramifications that it brings? What are the various symptoms of the disease? And then there are different types of adhyasa we encounter. I told you some examples we do in real life, and we do with ourselves also. And then we will recognize the remedy of samsara, and we establish the ground for understanding the process of desuperimposition. This desuperimposition is called apavada. So there are resources, the Brahma Sutram Chatushrutri by Swami Dayananda Saraswati, my revered guru. And in that, Adhyasa bhasya by Shankara is written as an introduction to the Brahma Sutra. So that introduction is given very in detail in this book. So that could be a reference. And Brahma Sutra Bhashyam by Shankaracharya by Swami Gambhirananda is another great book. But essentially, we will rely on our class notes and some exposure to prerequisites if you want to take this course. Some prerequisite to Vedanta Sastra and ability to read Sanskrit would be very helpful in my classes. And like every other class, it will be a 90 minutes class per week. We will do the lecture for 75 minutes and ample time for question and answers. And usually I encourage and I welcome classroom participation. So with this, I will conclude and then we can take up some questions. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya purnameva vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om Tatsat Brahmarpanamastu Krishnarpanamastu. Om Tatsat. Okay.
Great, wonderful. A lot of stuff there. We have a couple, we'll take Q&A. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you, but please put it in the Q&A box if you can type out the question. Dr. Lindamud, is Sanskrit really necessary or just a benefit?
It's a benefit, definitely, because I will use Sanskrit Devanagari text mainly, but all the lectures will be in English. Sometimes I need it for my convenience, otherwise it'll be hard to talk. And if you can follow that, that will be helpful, but not necessary. If where necessary, I will also give the transliteration, so you can follow the transliterated fonts of the Sanskrit words. And if the students, majority of them prefer that kind of a mode of teaching, then I can do that as well.
Great. Is a superimposition the real on the unreal or unreal on the real?
It is the unreal on the real. So unreal in the sense, like rope snake example, the rope is really the real, the adhishtanam or the substratum on which you superimpose. So the unreal is the snake, because there is no ontological reality for the snake. There is only ontological reality for the rope.
Okay. Yeah, DVG, I'll put the link for the class in the chat just briefly. David, isn't the Parabrahman itself a superimposition? Even if you come face to face, you will not know if it is or not Parabrahman.
The Brahman, the word Parabrahman, Param means limitless. So the Shastra uses the taxonomy Brahman to show to you, the student, that there is a limitless entity. Let's call it an entity. It's a lack of better word. I say entity. There is a limitless entity. And then the process of teaching is to show that that limitless entity is in fact you. Okay. So that you, the subject, the content of the subject, what you think as the subject now is not the subject, but the content of that I is that limitless Brahman. So Brahman is a taxonomy. So we forget Brahman after a while. That Brahman is you, Atma, the self. So therefore, that self, which is the content of the subject, can never be objectified. So the Parabrahman is not going to appear in front of you. So therefore, that's why I carefully framed my condition for Adhyasa. It is not that it has to be, it can be self-evident also, or evident. Evident is the rope, that object rope. But self-evident is this Atma, I. Even here you can make a superimposition.
Okay. Prabhatji and Yashji, I see your hands up in the chat. Let's take one more question and then see if you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Philip is asking.
Yes.
All right, Prabhatji, you're up next, and then
Yes.
Yashji.
Can you?
Philipji, yeah, we can hear you. So
Okay.
Philip is asking, who is the doer of these superimpositions? Who is the doer of these superimpositions?
The doer
who
of the
or what creates the process of impositions?
Yeah.
So two parts.
The doer, the one who makes the superimposition, is the ignorant self. The ignorant self. The self, what you take yourself to be the self is not the self. So that ignorant I, the functional ignorant I, makes the superposition.
Okay. So go ahead, Prabhatji.
Okay, thank you, Ankurji. Namaskaram, Dr.
Namaskar.
Brahman. So, I have heard that Adi Shankaracharya is responsible for also, re-establish Hinduism over the rising Buddhism during his time. So is that true? And then also Buddhism had or has Jatak Katha, Jatak stories. And, stories are a very good form of kind of spreading your messages. And that's when Puranas were constructed, perhaps, so that Hinduism is also shared through stories. Is that true? And if it is true, then Buddha's also is kind of 600, 700 BC. So that will put his time also in that context around 700 BC.
Yeah, the Buddha and the followers of Buddha, what we say Bauddhas, Buddha and Bauddhas, they don't accept, first of all, Vedas as the means of knowledge. So they don't give any credibility to Vedas. So they don't accept the Vedas. So that is number one. Number two, and of course, that does not mean that they cannot come up with their own proposition of what is the true ontological reality of this I, the self. So they also posited several ideas of what this I could be. And there are Yogacharas, one of the followers of Buddha, then Madhyantika Bauddhas, another sect of Buddhas. They all offered different contentions of the Atma I. And Shankaracharya takes upon those contentions and refutes all of them based on the Shruti Pramanam and also by reasoning. And that's what happens in the commentaries on Brahma Sutras. So a lot of detailed commentaries are given to refute the propositions of Buddhas or Bauddhas. Not that he directly confronts Buddha, the Bauddhas, the followers of Buddha. What you say about the Puranas is correct. The Puranas, which are subsequent to the Vedas, the Smriti, it's like a Smriti Grantham. It's a recorded. Veda Vyasa is said to have made all the 18 Puranas in our Sanatana Dharma. The Puranas express the ideas of the Upanishads, but in a different manner. They have different ways of communicating. Some of the statements are yathartham, as it is in the Upanishad, they say. Some of them are enigmatic, they say in a mythical way or a metaphysical way. And some of them are metaphorical by examples and similes and so on, metaphors. So these are the three techniques Puranas convey the same message of the Upanishad. And the Purana literature requires a careful interpretation to understand that they are not contradicting the Vedic message.
Nice.
And where the Puranas formed in response to Jatak Katha.
I don't know much about the Jatak Kathas. I don't know, maybe they are similar, same time frame or whatever. The idea of propagating something through stories has been prevalent. Even today it is prevalent in India. But then the ideas, you don't compromise the truth of the idea when you when you propagate it through storytelling. And so you have to discern that. So the interpretation, the Pauranika, who tells the story of the Puranas, has a responsible job of telling what the Purana says, but pointing out what the truth is.
Thank you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Great. Thank you for that, Prabhaji. I know you also put it in the chat. So thank you for your question. I have dropped the link to the course in the chat. It's going to be on Mondays, 8 p.m. Eastern time for about an hour and a half. It's going to start October 9th. So please do click that link to get into some more details. We'll also follow up this webinar with email with other links, a recording. If you have questions, we'll do that as well. If you can, please fill out this poll that I am launching right now. If you're interested in Dr. Swaminathan's course starting on October 9th, again, the details are in the chat. Also, a couple other questions. If you're interested in the certificate program in Hindu studies, this course does fit the requirements for that whole certificate program in Hindu studies. Again, building that base so that Hindus can be Hindus with clarity and confidence. or a different program, just let us know. You have to fill out each of those questions. So DVG is asking the D superimposition. How detailed will you go into that as that is the key for Brahmanyan?
That's right. That is the key. Very, very good question. That's the key. If I give you the answer, you won't take the course. So I think you should take the course. We will go in detail.
And that's a deep conversation that takes a whole hour long. And even after an hour of a course, you're not going to get into it. We're kind of nearing the top of the hour right now for the webinar. So please do consider taking the course. We'll take as many questions as we can. Yashpal, you have your hand up and you're asking a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is that instead of detail, I am interested in summary. The reason is that we study, but what is the purpose of studying? My purpose is to put it into action. You see that today, what is taught in Western universities or us in India also is just the history, just the mechanics of it. You see, whereas hearing you, it appears to me that the whole area of psychology and philosophy needs to be re-engineered to actually put it to use. And so my question is that how can I get that knowledge? Do you have some sort of book which will summarize these concepts in English? You see, I don't know a word of Sanskrit. I don't know English either. You see, but I understand the diagramming and engineering knowledge because I'm a worker. You see, I'm not interested in degrees or name and things like that. I just want to work.
Yeah, good, fair. It's fair. I understand where you are coming from. It's a fair question. I can't give you a one-liner answer. It will be very flippant on my part, which I won't do. It's a deep discussion and contemplation to find out, even in the first place, whether this knowledge is that something. First of all, we have to understand the difference between knowledge and practicing that knowledge. So that's a big discussion we should have. And then later, we should say, when you hear something, a piece of information about you, what do you do with that information is another topic to discuss. So I don't want to give you any brief answer which you are requesting, because the brief answer will be a flippant answer, and that's not fair to you and not fair to the Shastra. So please do consider. I will take the class and I will try my best to satisfy what you are looking for. But let me put it in one example here. Maybe you can think about it. Usually we think that we learn something and that is bookish knowledge. Then we think we have to do something about it. So this is the orientation we have. This is like what we say, my teacher used to say, cookbook logic, meaning you have the recipe of an item that you want to make. Gulab jamun, that's my favorite dish, so I use always that example, gulab jamun. So there is a sheet of paper somebody gives me, how to make gulab jamun. So they give the ingredients, the list of how much spoons of sugar, how much all these details are given. I read them thoroughly. I even memorize them. Okay, but then what do I have to do? I have to go to the kitchen, get all the samagris, the ingredients, all the measures correctly, etc. Then I need a vessel. Then I have to make according to that recipe that I have memorized, make the gulab jamun. Then I have to eat it. Then only I get the benefit of gulab jamun. This is the orientation we have. That means a bookish knowledge will not serve any purpose if we want to experience the benefit of that knowledge. It has to be put into action. In Sanskrit, it's called jnana karma samuchayam. Jnana means knowledge, karma means action. Knowledge has to be followed by an action. This is the generic statement, generally true for a lot of things, but unfortunately or fortunately, it is not true in the case of Atmajnanam, self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is knowledge. There is no knowledge and practice. So this dichotomy, has to be resolved first before we know what we are looking for. And some of this may or may not be discussed in the class, I don't know, depending on how the dynamics of the class goes. But I would only submit to you at this stage to answer your question. You have to decouple this usual assumption that bookish knowledge has to be practiced or put into action. That orientation has to go. Then only this knowledge will make sense.
Okay, yeah. You see here, what is happening is that the knowledge is infinite. You see, so what my approach has been, it is like there are two methods. One is linear and one is random. You see, and it depends on one's personality. How do you approach a problem? You see, in engineering or in problem solving, one is an intuitive method that you are aware of all the knowledge, but you start from the problem and intuitively you know in what direction to go and you start going.
Yeah.
Okay, so my makeup is like that. I am following you 100%. And I saw your background. You say, I am 83 years old, okay? And I did my PhD in artificial intelligence in 1968. Okay.
Shubham.
Okay, so I'm aware of that. So it is like what in physics, what is known as quantum mechanics. You see, there are two ways to store information. For example, you can store it serially or you can store it randomly. Okay, so I take the random approach, but I'm very aware of all the possibilities but hit the target.
Yeah. Oh, good for you. I think, Shubham. So the only, again, I would pause it before you for some patience and consideration. Self-jnanam, atma-jnanam is called paravidya, and all the physics, artificial intelligence, quantum mechanics, all that is aparavidya. In paravidya, there are certain distinctions which we first need to appreciate. Then we proceed further. Then it yields the result. So I think that I don't think it will be settled now in the discussion you and I are having in a few minutes. It's a deeper study for many years before we come to understanding of what this paravidya is. Great. So with that, I will.
Thank you for that conversation, Yashji. Appreciate you and your consistent support for HUA and attendance and these conversations. Yashji, Jayaji is asking, is Sakshi, the observer, a superimposition?
Good, yeah. Ultimately, the Sakshi, when we say Sakshi, the witness, Sakshi is the witness, that is the closest you come to in understanding the true nature of yourself. But the word Sakshi, the taxonomy, is only with a reference to what is witnessed. Only when there is something witnessed, then there is a witness. Then in the Vedanta Shastra, we will demolish the ontological reality of what is witnessed. When what is witnessed itself is not real, then there is no need to say there is a Sakshi. So you have to transcend the Sakshyam, or I mean the status of being a Sakshi, that also you have to transcend. Yes.
Thank you for that. We have kind of a series of questions from David, who asked that earlier question on Parabrahman. So I'm just going to read his kind of three things together.
Okay.
What if it was indeed the snake, right? Building on your example. Wouldn't you be better safe than sorry, right? That's one. But ignorance is not limited to the individual, isn't it? Every single aspect of the divine creation, Prakriti, is also full of ignorance, because irrespective of the knowledge of Rayleigh scattering, the sky still appears blue, even on a selfless, inanimate camera. Why? And his last point, has anyone in history conquered, overcome this universal phenomenon? of
No,
superimposition?
okay, this is called Sobhana Adhyasa. That is the blue sky. Even after you know it is due to Rayleigh scattering, and our rishis knew this before Rayleigh, Lord Rayleigh, the pratiti, the appearance will continue. It is like the sunrise and sunset. There is no sunrise, no sunset, but it will still appear to be sunrise and sunset. So we recognize them as apparitional and not real. So that is how, as long as this body, mind, sense complex has a functional empirical life, in that empirical reality, this blue sky will continue to appear even when you know there is no blue sky. The sunrise will continue to be a sunrise even though you know the sun doesn't rise. So that Sobhana, it's called Sobhana Adhyasa. An Adhyasa where you recognize it as an Adhyasa.
Okay. So an anonymous person is asking books that can help us start on the path before the course, or just maybe alternate research, other stuff. You know, HUA has a very active YouTube where we share videos, and I think Dr. Swaminathan, we put one of yours up there already. And we have a lot of other opportunities to dig deep and explore through the different HUA channels. Are there any books in particular you recommend, Dr. Swaminathan?
I can't think of anything offhand. There is a book called Introduction to Vedanta by Swami Dayananda Saraswati. And I think that might be a good introduction. People who are not familiar with the taxonomy and the Vedantic lexicon, they will benefit and also get some basic idea of what this inquiry is all about. So I would say Introduction to Vedanta. And also by the same Dayananda, there is a book called The Teaching Tradition of the Upanishads, where the different models are written, the models that are used in the Vedanta Shastra. So that could also be helpful.
Great. And those are both by Pujya Swami Dayananda Saraswati. Prabhatji has a kind of a follow-up on para, right, realm, beyond, not being recognized in the Western studies, because the Western way are currently dominated by apara, realm, around the realm. Any comments on that? Is that?
Okay, it's a fair to say, but apara vidya is dominating West or East everywhere. It is same. I'm not going to differentiate East or West or anything. Everywhere that is the same dominance. So the people who are committed to Paravidya and exploring and inquiring or imploring about the self are always a minority, no matter where they are, whether East, West, or whatever. So my view, I could be wrong, but my view is Aparavidya is East also is only Aparavidya.
Yeah,
India today is only Aparavidya. So
I think that is the dominating way of thinking, and part of what Hindu University of America is doing is trying to do our part to move away from that or move towards the deeper stuff. Dr. Swaminathan, it's been a pleasure. You're amazing addition to the Hindu University faculty. Glad that you're teaching a course now, and looking forward to this one as well in Adi Śaṅkara.
Yeah.
And do you have any closing thoughts? Any other statements, comments?
No, thank you for arranging this webinar. I think you people are doing a great job in bringing the awareness to people of the great tradition, the Sanatana Dharma, and organizing various courses taught by different people and so on. So I consider that as a blessing to share what little I know that I have learned from my gurus to your audience. And having said that, I would only ask or plead with the listeners, not that you don't have, but give it a open look. Have an open mind. Don't, based on whatever you know now, conclude something. Just have an open mind. Prepare, look at these books that I suggested or whatever else, and then examine whether this what the Upanishads say is meaningful or not. So that's all I would say. So just give some consideration.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Dhanyavad for our weekly webinar in the University of America. See you at the next one or maybe in class. Dhanyavad.
Okay.
Namaste.
Thank you. Namaskar. Bye.